Yeah, my pet got me pretty good last night. It was an accident. I just wasn't being careful while I was cooking. I'm just fine. I don't need any help. These are all excuses I and thousands of others have used, both in the past and present, to justify the self-mutilation we often cause to our bodies. For nearly 5 years, I turned to self-harm as a means of coping with stress, anxiety, and even a sexual assault, but eventually it devolved into a task that I performed every single day. Though most of my scars have since healed, there's actually evidence of the nasty habit on my thighs, forearms, hips, and even the sides of my hands. According to the Mental Health America, or MHA, self-injury, also known as self-harm, self-mutilation, or self-abuse, occurs when someone intentionally and repeatedly harms themselves in a way that is impulsive and intended not to be lethal. In America today, 4% of adults, 15% of teens, and between 20 and 35% of college-age students admit to performing NSSI, or non-suicidal self-injury. And today, I want to show you signs of self-harm, as well as give you some ways to discuss self-harm with others that may be struggling. First, let's look at NSSI as a coping mechanism. For a person that uses self-harm as a coping mechanism, such as myself, they would be inflicting pain upon themselves as a means of relieving negative forces in their life, like abuse, stress, or mental illness. For me, I would cut to relieve the pressure that came with high expectations my parents had for me, an anxiety disorder that has gone undiagnosed at the time, and even a sexual assault from someone that said they had loved me. The physical pain would often mask the emotional pain I was feeling and relieve what would feel like a physical pressure in my body. And this is how most people use non-suicidal self-injury. They use it to cope with the pressures of everyday's work, like life and school. They use it to mask the turmoil that comes with mental illness, or they use it as a means to feel something other than numbness and despair. NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, states that the urge to hurt yourself may start with overwhelming anger, frustration, or pain. Sometimes injuring yourself stimulates the body's endorphins, or pain-relieving hormones, thus raising the mood. Or if a person doesn't feel many emotions, they might cause pain to themselves in order to feel something real, to replace emotional numbness. Once a person injures themselves, they may experience shame or guilt, and if the shame leads to intense negative feelings, the person may end up hurting themselves again. The behavior can thus become a dangerous cycle and a long-time habit, with some people even creating rituals around it. Signs of a person using NSSI may include scars or wounds of an unknown origin, keeping sharp or dangerous objects around for no reason, wearing long clothes even in high temperatures, frequent injury, behavioral or emotional instability, impulsivity, or unpredictability, and statements of hopelessness or worthlessness. Though someone may start out using NSSI as a coping mechanism, NSSI can quickly turn into a habit just as addictive as alcohol or substance abuse. Once NSSI becomes less of a coping mechanism and more of an addiction, the situation then becomes critical, and it can be nearly impossible to know if a person is even able to stop self-mutilation. When we get hurt, our body tends to release two chemicals, adrenaline and dopamine. Adrenaline acts as a shield and keeps our bodies from going into shock, instead giving us an extra jolt of energy, and keeping us from feeling the pain of the injury. The hormone dopamine is a neurotransmitter that bears epinephrine and carries messages to and from the brain and everywhere else. When we hurt ourselves, the body releases extra dopamine to compensate for the adrenaline wearing off and the pain that we will later feel. We also associate dopamine with addiction. When someone becomes addicted to drugs, they crave the dopamine or pleasure that comes with the high the drug releases. When someone is addicted to porn, they want the dopamine that comes with sexual release. When someone's addicted to NSSI, they want the dopamine and the adrenaline the body releases as an act of self-defense. Just as with any other addiction, an addiction to self-harm is hard to break and usually requires intense psychotherapy to overcome the addiction, as well as replacing it with healthier coping mechanisms. Sometimes, people battling their addictions are also fighting a much bigger, well-hidden monster, and their addiction becomes a cry for help so that they may finally begin overcoming their struggles. In an article by the American Psychological Association titled Who Self-Injures, Tori DeAngelis writes that researchers also find that NSSI is a strong predictor of future suicide attempts. In 2013, a study reported in the Journal of Adolescent Health, Whitlock, Muhlenkamp, and colleagues followed 1,466 students at 5 American colleges over 3 years. Students who self-injured at the beginning and did not report suicidal thoughts, plans, or actions at the time, but who did engage in 20 or more self-injuring behaviors, were 3.4 times more likely to have attempted suicide by the study's end. Self-harm is most often regarded as a side effect and a coping mechanism of other deep-seated mental illnesses or personal issues like sexual orientation, depression, addiction, abuse, or eating disorders. While people intend to harm themselves non-fatally, an SSI can worsen or create mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, and addiction, which is usually attributed to emotional dysregulation, which is the brain's inability to differentiate between emotional states and coping mechanisms. NAMI states that self-harm isn't the same as attempting suicide. However, it is a symptom of emotional pain that should be taken seriously. If someone is hurting themselves, they may be at an increased risk of feeling suicidal, and it's important to find the underlying treatment for the underlying emotions. In most cases, an SSI isn't a solo disease, but instead the after effect of another issue that creates the urge to self-harm. By getting to the root cause of a person's NSSI, they are creating a greater opportunity to heal and live a better life. How can we as individuals lower the number of people self-harming, though? Well, let me tell you. The hard part comes first, and it's confrontation. Now for this, I'd like to talk about something called the ATLAS approach. ATLAS standing for alone, talking, listening, accountability, and sympathy. When I myself learned in therapy. First, getting the person to meet with you alone, in an environment that they feel safe and comfortable in. But be sure not to corner them, because you don't want it to feel like an attack. Instead, you want it to be an open conversation. Secondly, start the conversation by talking to them about how they feel and ask them to be honest, which allows them to start the conversation. Listen to everything they have to say, and don't speak until they have said everything they need and want to say, because it shows that you're listening and that your opinion isn't what's important right now. Start an accountability plan and offer your help. Don't just tell them what to do. Instead, let them state what they need and go from there. Lastly, sympathize. Just because you don't understand why they do what they do doesn't mean they aren't in pain. And most of the time, all they need to start towards recovery is someone to listen and show they care. If you yourself are the person struggling with self-harm, here are some helpful resources that I personally used while I was recovering. Firstly, we have resources like the Suicide Hotline and the Mental Health Association Hotline. Both are open 24 hours a day and can be reached by text, call, or chat through their websites. There's also a mobile app called 7 Cups. Despite the silly name, 7 Cups is one of the most helpful parts of my recovery, and I still use it today. It is full of different communities for people going through different things. It allows for a daily journal, tracks recovery progress, and allows for one-on-one conversation with licensed psychiatrists from all over the world for free. While a silly app for one person may not seem like enough to make a change, for me and thousands of others, they were the difference between life and death. A lot of people struggle with NSSI, and the vast majority remain hidden. For those that use it as a coping mechanism, deal with it as an addiction, or see it as a cry for help, NSSI is a daily battle. It's hard-fought and shameful, but with the help from loved one and peers, those statements of denial can quickly become calls for help. Yes, I hit myself again last night. I can't stop cutting myself and I don't know why. No, I'm not okay.